Well, today we're continuing our series, which I've entitled The Stages of Faith Development. We've looked at two biblical characters and watched their journey of faith. We saw how God worked in Jacob's life and Abraham's life. And what we saw is that there are four stages of faith development. The first phase that we all find ourselves in as we are children and sometimes into our adult years is chaos. This is where we are when we have no commitment to any faith at all. We recognize all around us are people that are committed to ways of life, but we ourselves at that stage are just committed to our own self-interest. And because none of us is wise enough to know how to live their lives apart from God, then our decisions tend to result in chaos in our lives. And when we finally get tired of the chaos, we choose to come into a covenant with God. We go through a conformity stage of life where we are now committed to learning how to conform our life to the will of God and how to live that out in our life. And if we continue to grow, then we go through a questioning phase where we begin to ask questions about what we believe and why we believe it and get deeper into our faith. And eventually, hopefully, we grow into conviction stage faith, the final phase, where we are deeply convicted within and are motivated internally to do the will of God. No longer external conformity, it's internal drive within us. And so we want to look today from conformity to questioning with Job. Job is a godly man. Let's start and see the assessment. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Job. Notice it says he's one of the greatest of those who are men of the East. When you hear that, remember that this is a Jewish writer writing from the context of Palestine, the homeland of Israel, and so it would be east of that land. And just to the east of that land is a lot of desert-like territory. A number of different people groups live there, the Moabites and the Edomites. It appears from the name Job and some of the other names later on in the book that these were probably Edomites or people, maybe the Midianites that lived near them. So this was one of the great men of the ancient past who appears not to be an Israelite. There were righteous individuals that were not a part of God's covenant people Israel. Abraham ran into one of them, Melchizedek, another true worshiper of God. And so there were these individuals that knew the one true and living God, but were not a part of God's covenant promise to Abraham. This appears to be such a man. And it tells us he was blameless and upright. Now, this doesn't mean he's perfect. It just means that he is seeking to do the right thing towards God, blameless, and towards human beings, he's trying to be upright, do the right thing. And the expression, he feared God, this was a euphemism, a Hebraic expression for a person that deeply reverenced God and in light of that sought to do what is right in the sight of God. And also, it tells us he shunned evil. So he not only did the right thing, but he went out of his way to shun that which was evil. He didn't toy around with sinful pleasures, but he shunned evil. And here we have a description of what would be an affluent person in the ancient world. The ancient world was not a cash-based society. If they had any coinage, it was valuable because it was bronze or it was silver or it was gold. So it's the metal itself that had value. There was no paper money in the ancient world. And the wealth of most people had to do with their agricultural land they owned, had to do with animals that they had, the number they had. And here, as it describes Job, he had these countless numbers of sheep, which would have provided more than enough food for himself. So this would have been something that he would use the wool for, to make garments. And oxen, many oxen, which meant there need to be fields that were plowed. So he obviously had a great deal of land to have these many oxen. Had a number of servants. It was just too much for he and his sons to take care of by themselves. So it's telling us, in terms of the ancient Middle East, this was an extremely wealthy man. Put in modern terms, he's a billionaire. Used to be a millionaire. Now you could be a millionaire and not be so well off. That's called inflation. But now it's being a billionaire. Well, in his day, Job was that wealthy individual. And at the same time, he was a righteous man. And the inference, of course, from Scripture and from common sense is we all believe that if you do the right thing, that God will bless you. And sometimes that's seen in terms of material prosperity. And it obviously was the case for Job. Well, we go from an earthly scene to a heavenly scene. We have to keep in mind Job has no idea of this. The writer lets us in on what's going on in heaven, a meeting of the heavenly court of God. Verse 6 through 8. One day the angels, I don't like this translation, it's really sons of God. Angels and sons of God were different spiritual beings, a part of God's heavenly court. They came to present themselves before the Lord, and it should be here, the Satan also came with them. The Lord said to the Satan, "Where have you come from?" The Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him." So God agrees with the opening statement. He is blameless, an upright man who fears God and shuns evil. So this is not just the writer of the book's assessment of Job. This is God's assessment of Job. Now, the idea of God having a heavenly court suggests that there's a whole realm, an invisible realm to us, in which God reigns, that interacts with our world. and they're spiritual beings in that world. And the most powerful spiritual beings in the ancient world would be the sons of God. The sons of God, some of them, we find out in the Old Testament, rebelled against God's will for them and so became rebels. But many of the sons of God continues to serve God to this very day. And we are being included in the future group that will be the immortal sons of God. And so in addition to them, there were angels, there were cherubim, there were all kinds of spiritual beings in the unseen realm, and all of them are a part of God's heavenly court, and so they are accountable to him, and periodically they meet like a king's court would in the ancient world. And then it says, and the key here, I think, which is a little confusing, is in the original language, every time it uses Satan, it says the Satan. And in Hebrew, that's the word hey. Hey, Satan. Hey, Satan. Now, in Hebrew, you never put the in front of the name of a person. You put it, if it's a name, then it's describing a function. This is a representative figure doing something. And so this is the Satan. And Satan means the accuser. And so we see that it was evidently the role of the Satan to roam the earth and check on what was going on, observe human behavior, and evidently reported back to God. And he kind of functions as the district attorney, kind of the prosecutor for the government, who is coming to find information and bring charges against others. And so he appears before God, and God, wanting us to know something about it, says, well, where have you been? And the Satan is a little vague. He's not going to be completely accountable to God, but he says, well, I've been wandering on the earth, been checking things out down below. And then the Lord says, well, have you seen my servant Job, who's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil? Well, he's drawn attention to what the Satan knows is a godly man, but Satan has some opinions about this. Verse 9. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now, stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So what we see occurring behind the scenes, Job's not aware of this. Things are going on earth, totally unaware of the heavenly court meeting, in which God has said, I believe that Job is a righteous man who shuns evil, does the right thing, and fears me in the right sort of way. But the Satan is skeptical. He says, well, of course, Job is well behaved. Look what you've done for him. You've put like a hedge around him. You haven't allowed the forces that oftentimes destroy a man's wealth and destroy his life. You protected him from all these things, and you blessed him to allow him to be the billionaire that he is now. Well, of course, who wouldn't serve you if they all knew they were going to get this back in return? But he said, all you have to do is just take those blessings away, take his material success and prosperity from you, and instead of being this devout religious person, the Satan says he'll curse you because of that. Well, this is said in a public gathering of the heavenly court, and so God, because the integrity of Job is questioned, and also the wisdom of God is being questioned. Are you just manipulating people on earth, and are they serving you because you're handing out goodies to them? Or do people really love you, God, like you seem to think they do? And so, in order to prove the validity of what he believed, God allowed the Satan to go after what he said, if taken away, would cause Job to curse God. And so that's where the drama continues. Again, the Satan is skeptical of what motivates human beings. He thinks everyone is motivated purely, selfishly, and if all of a sudden being religious doesn't work for you, then you'll turn on God in a second. That's his prognostication. Well, we look at some catastrophic events that occur, one after another, in climactic order. Verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Wow. A lot of bad things happening very suddenly. Well, it's not uncommon in the ancient world, if you were a king or you were a group of people, you couldn't become wealthy by developing some company of some kind. The way people in the ancient world became wealthy is they got together as a group. They found people that had the stuff they liked, and they came over and took it from them by force. That's what people did in the ancient world over and over and over again. They take their land from them, they take their things from them, and Job had a lot of property. And so the Sabaeans came and took them and killed his servants, so I guess they couldn't pursue him nor defend themselves. And then fire from God. Well, you may not be as aware of this. In that part of the world, at certain seasons of the year, when it's a little dry, if lightning hits the ground and starts a fire, because of the wind at certain seasons, it can spread rapidly. And I know, for example, where I grew up in West Texas, I was talking to an old timer, and they said sometimes you looked at in the distance and you saw smoke rising up, and you knew there'd been lightning and stuff in the area, and you assumed a lightning strike had started a fire. what you did is you packed yourself up, everybody you could, and you ran for the closest water hole, and you got out in the middle of the water and prayed that the fire would go by you and you'd survive. But this fire would rage across the plains of West Texas, burning everything for thousands of miles, do it in a very short period of time, and everything would be burned up. If you're in the middle of a water hole, you might survive. Well, it's the same sort of environment that West Texas is. It's what was the land that was on the east of the Israelites. And so lightning started a fire, and all of his animals were consumed. So, again, a messenger comes from each one after another, with tales of disaster. Then there's more, verse 17. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert, tornado, and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. Wow. In short order, Job has lost everything that he owned, and then his most precious relationships, his children, and therefore his future. I mean, what good would it be having things if he couldn't pass them on to his children? Now he has no children, but he has no things either. Now he's dead broke and lost all of his family in one catastrophic event happening after another. Now, you and I know that this was the work of the Satan, the Satan. Job doesn't know who did what, and he's going to have to try to think through this and try to make sense of it. And that's what the book of Job is about. It's about the innocent sometimes suffer unjustly. And so how do they handle that? We are not always blessed by God, but sometimes we're attacked by the accuser. And so how do we handle that? Notice Job's initial response, beginning in verse 20. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Common things of sign of mourning. That would be especially because of the children. Then he fell to the ground in worship. So he would bow down before God and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin in charging God with wrongdoing. So we do see that Job is a devout man. He could have said, wait a minute, what did I do to deserve this? How come God turned on me? Hello, anybody there? This isn't right. It's not just. And of course, oftentimes people feel like that how life is going for them is not rewarding them for doing right, punishing them for evil. They're being punished while they're doing the right thing. But Job has an attitude, everything comes from God, and so God gave, God has the right to take it away. And then he also recognized a profound truth, what do we bring into this world? Nothing. And how are we going to depart? With nothing. So he said, I guess, if God gave it, he can take it away. I came to this world with nothing. I'll depart with nothing. So I can accept this, and I will, instead of be angry at God, I will praise the name of the Lord. Powerful example of profound perseverance and patience on the part of Job. And notice it says he did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Stay tuned. Job's patience will wear out, but not instantly. Then, moving on, there's another meeting of the heavenly court. Chapter 2, verse 1. On another day, the angels, or sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord. And thus Satan also came with them to present himself before them. And the Lord said to the Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, just wandering. Then the Lord said to the Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Wow. That's pretty profound, isn't it? God sees it very clearly, sees it for what it is. But the encounter continues. You might think that at this point the Satan said, well, you're right, God. Job's a very righteous man, and I took all that he had, and he still worshiped you and praised you and didn't charge you with any wrong, or much less curse you to your face. But the Satan has more thoughts on this. Verse 4, skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, well, then he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with a painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. It was not uncommon in ancient villages. You'd have a refuse heap where they would burn all the refuse, the stuff that trash of the village. And if you were in great mourning and suffering, sometimes you might go to a lonely place like this because people are not hanging out at the local dump where the trash is burning. And so Job is in great physical suffering. There's no medicine for this kind of skin disease. He's taking a broken pottery sherd and kind of scraping perhaps the pus things off and through the various parts of his body to try to relieve himself to some extent. But there's no relief for Job. He's got some sort of chronic skin disease that's causing boils all over his body. Now, you and I know he's not going to die because God said you can't take his life, but Job doesn't know that. Job figures, I've got this incurable disease, I'm in terrible misery, and if you're miserable enough, dying begins to look like a good option to continuing to suffer in this manner. And Job assumes that this suffering he's going through is probably going to lead to that. But he's struggling, suffering greatly. And then a person that hasn't been involved in the discussion gets involved. We see Job's further response, verse 9. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" And all this Job did not sin in what he said. Well, you might think you could look to your spouse for some support, help, some encouragement. Not Job. Job's wife is just bottom line. Why are you trying to maintain your integrity as a devout religious man? What good is it doing you? Why don't you just go ahead and curse God, and then he'll kill you, and you'll be better off than suffering like you are now. So that's his wife's suggestion. She doesn't realize she's going along with the Satan's plan, but that's what she's doing. So Job gets no comfort, no solace, no help from his spouse. But in all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now, the inference from that is, well, he's not saying anything bad yet, but maybe he's thinking some things like, this isn't right. I mean, enough's enough. I've lost everything. Now I've got this seemingly incurable disease I'm suffering with. Enough's enough. When's God going to give me some relief? And by the way, why do I deserve this? Why am I being treated this way by God? Well, Job's community of faith arrives. Same chapter, verse 11 through 13. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. So here are some of Job's peers, other men that are devout men that fear God and seek to be upright individuals. So you would think, well, I didn't get comfort at home from my spouse, but here are my friends. They've traveled a long distance here. They've come here to sympathize with me and to comfort me. And so Job, great suffering, there at the ash heap in the city where the trash is burning, scraping himself. His friends come, and when they come, they can hardly recognize him. And when they get there, it may be a little bit different than how we would do things, but what they did by their activity, when it says they began to weep aloud, tore their robes, and sprinkled dust on their heads, that's what you did at a funeral. That's what you did in the ancient Near East if you showed up and somebody died. So they show up and look at Job, and they think he's as good as dead. He's a dead man. And so they go through the funeral rite. And no one comforts Job, notice. No one says a word. So they sit there with him. They're in shock. They can't believe this man they thought was a righteous man whom God had blessed, now suffering terribly, lost everything. What's going on here? They're in shock. And they don't speak. So, not only has Job lost all his material possessions, lost his family with the exception of his wife's of no help whatsoever to him in his suffering. His community of faith, the people he considered his friends, show up, and they are supposed to be there to sympathize and comfort him, but they have no words of comfort. They just sit there in stunned silence and observe the suffering of Job. It's a bad situation. Well, finally, somebody has to break the silence, and Job does, and Job begins to complain. He's been quiet about this. He's been respectful towards God, but now he begins to think he's got a little complaint. Chapter 3, verse 1, following. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Now, whose fault is it you were born? Well, parents, well, how about God? He said, may the day of my birth perish, and the night that said a boy is conceived, that day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. May gloom and utter darkness claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm it. That night might thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered in any of the months. Well, that's a kind of indirect way of complaining. Well, God, why did you let me be born if you're going to, after living a life of integrity, let me end up here and be suffering the way I am now? I wish I'd never been born. That's basically what Job was saying. I just wish I'd never been born. Yeah, you can understand. What has Job done differently recently that might cause all these catastrophic things to happen? And the answer is nothing wrong, right? But he came to the attention of the Lord and of the accuser. And the accuser has asked permission to afflict Job with a variety of losses and illness. Job doesn't know this, but he knows one thing. He's lost everything. He's in great physical suffering, and no one sympathizes or comforts him. He's all alone in his suffering. And in the agony of this suffering, he calls out and says, I wish I had never been born. Well, Eliphaz then speaks up after Job's complaint. He speaks a rebuke to Job. So you begin to get an idea of what was on the mind of his friends, Eliphaz, and Zophar and the others. Chapter 4. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, if someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled, and you have strengthened faltering knees. But now trouble comes to you, and you're discouraged. It strikes you, and you're dismayed. Should not your piety be your confidence, and your blameless ways your hope? So he's in effect saying, why are you complaining now, Job? Didn't you encourage others and help others when they were going through tough times? And now tough times have come to you, and you're complaining about it. Notice what Eliphaz's philosophy of life is. Here's what's the key to the book of Job. Is it Eliphaz and the others, and Job himself believes these things we're going to see Eliphaz vocalize, which leads them to wonder what in the world is God up to. Chapter 4, verse 7 through 9. Consider now, Eliphaz says, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I've observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. At the breath of God they perish, at the blast of his anger they are no more. Uh-oh. Eliphaz says, I don't know any innocent people who've ever suffered. I don't think upright people have gone through suffering. Now, what's the inference from that? You are suffering tremendously, therefore, we thought you were an upright, godly, pious man, but obviously you're not, Job. And so we're confronting you with the obvious. Look how you're suffering. What's gone wrong in your life? Because this doesn't happen to innocent people. This doesn't happen to upright people. But instead, it's those that do evil that stumble and suffer like you're suffering. And then a little later chapter, verse 17 of chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse 17, he kind of goes on to explain his philosophy. Blessed is the one whom God corrects, and so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. So he's looking at this as God's disciplining you, Job, trying to get you to, quit pretending to be an upright man and be one. For he wounds, but he also binds up. He injures, but his hands also heal. From 6 calamities he'll rescue you, and 7 no harm will touch you. In other words, God hasn't been quick to punish you, but now you are being punished, and you need to think about what's wrong in your life. God, like people say, God's trying to teach you something. Well, that's the philosophy of Eliphaz. Later in chapter 5, let's see, verse 27. Well, I wonder. We have examined this. Now he's speaking for the other group, the faith community, and it is true. So hear it and apply it to yourself. Boy, that's a lot of comfort. Here is Job. We know, Job knows that he's an upright and godly man, and he hasn't done anything wrong, certainly nothing to deserve what he's going through. We know that. We know God knows that, but the friends don't. The friends have a simple philosophy of life. I think a lot of people believe the same way today. If something goes wrong in your life, God's punishing you. And so he's punishing you because you need to be punished because you're not doing the right thing. So straighten up and fly right. This is discipline from God. Well, as we're seeing here, that's not the case with Job, is it? He's not being disciplined for something he's done wrong or being punished for something he's done wrong. He's been punished for doing the right thing. And so this philosophy of Eliphaz that I think Job had bought into, that his peers bought into, that many people believe today, that if anything goes wrong, things go wrong, you ask the question, well, I don't deserve this. Why is God letting this happen to me? Why am I suffering the way that I'm suffering? As if everything in life that you suffer is punishment from God you deserve, and every blessing in life is a reward because you're so good. That's an overly simplistic, if you will, a stage 2 type understanding. A little earlier, I didn't read about it. It said the conformity phase. Again, clearly Job and his peers are at the conformity stage, because the only problem with the conformity phase is some of their beliefs are a little bit simplistic, and they come up with a generality. In general, it's true that if you do the right thing, God will bless you, and that may be prosperity as well as other things, health, etc., as a general truism, but it's not true in all circumstances. It's not a universal truth. It's not always true. And Job is a classic example of that. So finally, Job complains about his friends. He didn't think he had a very good bunch after all. His community of faith wasn't helping him through his struggles at all. Chapter 6, verse 11. What strength do I have that I should still hope? What prospects that I should be patient? They'd ask you to be patient. Do I have the strength of a stone? Is my flesh bronze? Do I have any power to help myself now that success has been driven from me? Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. But my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams, as streams that overflow. You know, these, you don't find it as much here, but they're sometimes little tiny streams of water, and then it'll rain, and all of a sudden they overflow and flood and create a big catastrophe. He said, that's the kind of friends you are. You don't provide consistent water, but you'll overflow your blanks and create havoc. And that's what you're doing now. You're of no worth to me. I thought you were my community of faith, and you were going to help me through this journey, that I'd receive some comfort and insight from you so that I could endure this. But that's not happening. Verse 24, same chapter 6. Teach me and I'll be quiet. Show me where I have been wrong. How painful are honest words, but what do your arguments prove? Do you mean to correct what I say and treat my desperate words as wind? You would even cast lot for the fatherless and barter away your friend? But now be so kind as to look at me. Would I lie to your face? Relent. Do not be unjust. Reconsider, for my integrity is at stake. So now, on top of everything else that's gone wrong with Job, the one thing he has left is his moral integrity. He has not violated his relationship with God or violated his relationship with other people. He's done the right thing up to that very moment, and now his friends, because he's suffering, are questioning his integrity, saying, you fooled us. We thought you were upright. The way you're suffering, clearly God is punishing you. You've done something wrong, and you need to come clean. And that's going to be the dialogue we're going to see that's going to occur over the rest of the book of Job. But what we see is Job was a faithful conformist, but now his experience is challenging his thinking, because he's always thought, I do right and God blesses me. People that do wrong suffer. So I've continued to do right. Now I'm suffering worse than anybody I know on earth. So something's gone wrong with the moral universe I thought I was living in. And my understanding about God is being challenged. Now, Eliphaz and his friends will continue to defend that position, but Job has been pushed by his terrible experience of suffering out of the comforts of conformity, and now he's forced to question, what's going on here? What's God up to? I want to know. Well, we have our community of faith, and hopefully our community of faith is more helpful to us than Job. But here, notice what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14, about the community of faith. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, and be patient with everyone. Notice, you don't give everybody the same medicine. Same medicine isn't needed for every situation. If people are idle and disruptive, they need to be warned. But if they're weak, they don't need to be warned. They need instead to be encouraged if they're disheartened. And if they're just too weak, they don't need warning, and they don't need encouragement, they need help. And no matter what, be patient with everyone. Be patient with everyone. Well, first of all, we see that Job's circle of friends and community of faith, they were all into the warning. They were all into the rebuke and reprimand. They just thought, clearly Job's been fooling us. We thought he was an upright, righteous man, but what's going on in his life tell us he's not. Or God would not allow this to go on. And so we're here to rebuke Job and try to get him back on the right path. And Job's sitting in the middle of this saying, wait a minute, last week I'd have been with you on this and thought the same thing, but now I've experienced what I've experienced, and I realize that philosophy of life isn't true. But what does that mean? Well, that's what happens when you get thrust into the questioning stage of faith. And like I said last week, I think we're fortunate in this congregation. We have a number of mature people, so if you're going through struggles in a questioning stage of faith, there are people that will listen sympathetically and will offer good advice on how to work through the problems that you're facing. But Job didn't have that kind of community of faith. He didn't have anybody there to help him. So he is left to try to figure it out all on his own. And that's why the book of Job goes on, because in his conversation with his friends, he's questioning things, and gradually he comes to some conclusions about the issue. But this is early on. He complains about being ever born. Then he complains about what poor friends they've been. But he's not yet got to directly challenging God. But that's coming up, because Job is suffering in ways that I think are almost inconceivable. And the experiences of life will oftentimes be the things that prod us to rethink things. And it can be a chance to grow deeper in our faith and understanding of God, or it can be a big stumbling block that we just fall down and lose faith altogether. It depends on how we navigate hard and difficult times, because we'll all go through hard and difficult times at some time in our life. And not because we've been wicked or evil or bad, but it's because there's a Satan, the accuser, who wants us to suffer and wants us to turn on God and to curse him to his face. And we too will have to face challenging situations like Job did. And may we have as much faith as Job and patience as Job, and may we grow in our faith so we can handle the challenges of life that will come our way. Let's close with a word of prayer. Father, give us wisdom and give us strength as we face the challenges of our lives. Help us to be there to encourage and advise and help our brothers and sisters as they go through their struggles. And may, in all of this, may we continue to mature and grow in our faith realizing that oftentimes it's the hardships and difficulties of life that cause the most spiritual growth in our lives. And may we, Father, never forget who we are and whose we are in our spiritual journey of faith. We pray in Jesus' name.